5 people who snapped and took the law into their own hands. We're all taught to trust the system, that when we're wronged, the scales of justice will eventually balance. But what happens when that system feels broken? When your calls for help seem to echo into nothing? For some people, there's a breaking point. A moment an ordinary person becomes convinced that the only way to get justice is to deliver it themselves. These are the stories of 5 people who snapped. The line between justice and revenge is razor thin, and it's a line that isn't drawn in a quiet courtroom, but in the heat of a moment by people pushed beyond their absolute limits. Today we're exploring 5 real-world cases where individuals, feeling completely failed by the system meant to protect them, took matters into their own hands. Their actions are shocking, they're controversial, and they force us all to ask a really difficult question. What would you do? Section 1. Bernhard Goetz, the subway vigilante. Our first story drops us into the grimy, crime-ridden New York City of the 1980s. Back then, fear was a daily commuter on the subway, where dozens of crimes were reported every single day. And that's where we meet Bernhard Goetz, a man who was already the victim of a brutal mugging that left him with permanent injuries and a deep-seated vow to never be a victim again. On December 22, 1984, that vow was put to the ultimate test. On a downtown train, Goetz was approached by 4 young men. One of them, Troy Canty, said, "Give me $5. For Goetz, this was the exact moment he had been dreading and preparing for. He stood up, pulled out an unlicensed revolver, and in a matter of seconds, fired 5 shots, hitting all 4 youths. As the train screeched to a halt, Goetz vanished into the darkness of the subway tunnel, leaving chaos in his wake. Almost overnight, he became a folk hero, dubbed the subway vigilante by the press. For a city paralyzed by fear, he was a symbol of resistance. Bumper stickers read, "Ride with Bernie, he gets 'em." When he finally surrendered, a fierce public debate exploded. Was this righteous self-defense or a reckless, violent overreaction? The 4 young men were found to be carrying screwdrivers. While they claimed they were planning to break into video game machines, Goetz insisted he was about to be robbed. The racial undertones of the case, a white man shooting 4 black teenagers, added a volatile layer to the controversy that couldn't be ignored. In the end, a jury acquitted Goetz of attempted murder and assault, deciding he had acted in self-defense. He was convicted only for illegal gun possession and served just over 8 months in jail. Years later, a civil court ordered him to pay $43 million to Daryl Cavey, one of the young men who was left paralyzed by the shooting. The Bernhard Goetz case is still a lightning rod for debate, forcing a hard conversation about the blurred lines between fear, self-defense, and vigilantism in a society pushed to the edge. Section 2. Ellie Nessler, the mother's fury. What happens when the system designed to protect our most vulnerable fails? Our next story takes us to a small California courtroom in 1993, and to a mother named Ellie Nessler. Her young son was about to testify that he had been sexually abused by a man named Daniel Driver, who was on trial, accused of molesting multiple boys. During a recess, Nessler watched as Driver, the man who had destroyed her son's childhood, allegedly smirked at the boy. For Ellie, that was it. That was the breaking point. She walked out to her car, grabbed a handgun, walked back into the courthouse, and shot Daniel Driver 5 times, killing him. The act instantly turned Ellie Nessler into a national figure. She became a symbol for every person who believed the justice system was too slow and too soft on predators. The case ignited a massive debate about a parent's right to protect their child and the morality of taking a life to do it. While her defense argued she was having a mental breakdown, that sympathetic image started to crack when it was revealed she was high on methamphetamine during the shooting. Ultimately, Nessler was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. Her initial 10-year sentence was overturned on appeal because of juror misconduct, and she was released after serving 3 years. But her life remained a battle against cancer and drug addiction, and she was later sent back to prison on drug charges. Ellie Nessler died of cancer in 2008, leaving behind a tangled, tragic legacy. Was she a hero mom or just a killer? Her story is a heartbreaking reminder of how one horrific crime can create a ripple effect, destroying multiple lives both inside and outside the courtroom. Section 3. Marianne Bachmeier, the Revenge Mother. Some acts of vengeance are so stunning they become burned into a nation's collective memory. In 1981, in Lübeck, West Germany, Marianne Bachmeier committed one of those acts. Her 7-year-old daughter Anna had been brutally murdered by Klaus Grabowski, a known and convicted sex offender. On the third day of Grabowski's trial, Marianne Bachmeier entered the courtroom, a woman hollowed out by grief. But she wasn't just there to watch the proceedings. Tucked inside her coat was a Beretta pistol. She calmly walked up behind Grabowski, the man who had shattered her world, aimed the gun at his back, and fired 7 times, killing him almost instantly in front of the judge, jury, and everyone present. The courtroom shooting became one of the most famous cases of vigilante justice in German history. Bachmeier was nicknamed the Revenge Mother, and her actions split public opinion. To many, she was a grieving mother who delivered the only real justice the courts couldn't. While she was in custody, she was flooded with flowers and messages of support. But to others, she represented a dangerous assault on the rule of law itself. A civilized society can't have people acting as judge, jury, and executioner. To pay for her legal defense, Bachmeier sold her life story to a magazine for a large sum of money. Initially charged with murder, the prosecution later reduced the charge. She was convicted of manslaughter and illegal firearm possession and sentenced to 6 years, but was released on probation after serving only 3. After her release, she moved abroad to escape her past, but returned to Germany when she was diagnosed with cancer. She died in 1996 and was buried right next to her daughter Anna, the little girl for whom she sacrificed her own freedom in one final, devastating act of a mother's love and rage. These stories are messy. They don't have easy answers or clear-cut heroes and villains. They make us confront the darkest parts of human nature and the very real failures of our own systems. If you find these stories as compelling as we do, think about subscribing for more deep dives into the human psyche and the tough questions of our time. Section 4. Jason Vukovich, the Alaskan Avenger. Our next story takes us to Anchorage, Alaska, where modern technology became a tool for retribution. Meet Jason Vukovich, a man haunted by a childhood of horrific abuse at the hands of his adoptive father. That trauma festered and fueled a dark new purpose in his adult life. He would become what he called an avenging angel. In 2016, Vukovich used the state's public sex offender registry, a tool designed to keep the public safe, as his own personal hit list. He hunted down and brutally attacked 3 convicted sex offenders. The attacks were savage. One man was beaten so badly with a hammer, he was left with a traumatic brain injury. In his mind, Vukovich wasn't a criminal. He was a deliverer of justice, a protector of the innocent. His actions, however, were undeniably criminal. He was arrested and faced a long list of charges. The case created a bizarre paradox. Vukovich was a violent felon, but to some in the community, including 2 of his own victims, he was a hero who deserved to be free. They saw his violence as a justified response to the unforgivable crimes the men he attacked had once committed. The court strongly disagreed. As the judge made clear, vigilantism is not something that we accept in America. Vukovich himself, while taking responsibility for what he did, admitted his rampage was fueled by his personal demons and a meth addiction. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. In a strange twist, he was granted parole in 2023, but it was post-dated for 5 years, meaning he is not scheduled for release until 2028. Jason Vukovich's story is a raw look at how personal trauma can curdle into violent revenge and how modern tools can be twisted for purposes their creators never intended. Section 5. Jack Ruby, the nation's vigilante. Our final story is maybe the most famous act of vigilante justice in American history, one that played out on live television as a stunned nation watched. The date is November 24, 1963, just 2 days after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The man accused of the crime, Lee Harvey Oswald, is in the custody of the Dallas police. As Oswald was being transferred from the city jail, a Dallas nightclub owner named Jack Ruby suddenly stepped out from a crowd of reporters, shoved a pistol into Oswald's side, and fired one fatal shot. The murder of the president's alleged killer was broadcast live into millions of American homes. Ruby's motives have been picked apart for decades. He claimed he was overcome with grief and rage and that he wanted to spare First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy the pain of having to return to Dallas for Oswald's trial. To some, he was a patriot avenging a fallen president, but his actions also threw gasoline on a fire of conspiracy theories that still burn today. Was Ruby really just an emotional nightclub owner? Or was he part of a much larger plot, sent to silence Oswald before he could ever talk? Despite multiple investigations, including by the Warren Commission, no definitive link was ever found between Ruby and a wider conspiracy. Ruby was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, though that verdict was later overturned on appeal. Before a new trial could ever happen, Jack Ruby died of cancer in 1967, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. His impulsive act of revenge didn't bring closure. It just added another thick layer of tragedy and mystery to one of the darkest chapters in American history. From a heartbroken mother in a German courtroom to a tormented man in the Alaskan wilderness, these 5 people all reached a point where they felt the law had utterly failed them. They chose to act, and in doing so, they forever blurred the line between a quest for justice and a raw thirst for revenge. Their stories aren't simple. They aren't tales of good versus evil. They're raw, they're human, and they're deeply unsettling. They force us to look at our own society, at its failings, and at the darkness that can lurk inside any ordinary person who gets pushed too far. So where do you draw that line between justice and revenge? Let us know in the comments below.